Nummy. My grandmother's quilt still smells like lavender. I know because I pressed my face into it the morning of my cousin's Christmas dinner, sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off I-40, trying to remember how to breathe. I had the folder on the passenger seat. 43 pages. I'd printed every single one. That folder is the reason I'm still standing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Clara. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed physical therapist, and for the last 8 years, I have been quietly paying the utility bills, the property taxes, and the homeowner's insurance on a house I do not live in and do not own. The house belongs to my parents. My mother's name is on the deed. My father's name is on the deed. My name is on nothing except the automatic payment linked to my checking account, which for 8 years has been draining itself every single month like a slow, polite leak nobody wanted to talk about. I did not grow up poor. My parents were not struggling when I was a child. My father ran a small landscaping company for 20 years, and my mother worked the front desk at a dental office. We had a house, 2 cars, vacations to the Smoky Mountains every summer. We were fine, normal, ordinary in the best way. The trouble started when my father's business partner disappeared. I was 22, fresh out of physical therapy school, barely making rent in Raleigh. My father called me on a Tuesday evening and said that his business partner, a man named Doug, had withdrawn everything from their joint business account and vanished. $48,000. Gone in a single transfer. My father had no recourse, no savings cushion, and 3 outstanding invoices he couldn't pay. He asked if I could help cover the utilities for a few months, just until he got back on his feet. I said yes. That was 8 years ago. The few months became a year. The year became 3. I brought it up gently at first. Just checking in, just asking how things were going. My mother would say things were tight. My father would change the subject. After a while I stopped asking and started just accepting that this was the way things were. I told myself it was what you did for family. I told myself my grandmother would have done the same. My grandmother. That's where the story actually lives. Her name was Dorothy. Everyone called her Dot. She was 78 years old, 5'2", and the most stubborn woman I have ever loved. She made biscuits from scratch every Sunday, kept a journal every single day for 40 years, and called me every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock to ask about my patients without ever using their names. Just your knee replacement lady and your football boy. She was the person I called when I was scared. She was the person whose opinion I actually trusted. 4 years ago, my grandmother had a small stroke. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to slow her down. Enough to make her daughter, my Aunt Patricia, decide that she needed more supervision. Aunt Patricia lived 40 minutes from my grandmother and volunteered to become her primary caregiver. My parents agreed this was a good arrangement. I was not consulted, but I agreed too, because I lived 2 hours away and I was working 6 days a week, and I told myself Aunt Patricia was family and family could be trusted. I should have asked more questions. For the first year, I visited my grandmother regularly. Every 3 or 4 weeks, I'd make the drive to her house in Clemson, South Carolina, bring her pecans from the farmer's market because she loved them, sit with her for an afternoon. She was sharp. Slower moving, yes, but her mind was clear, and she was funny, and she still made the biscuits. She talked about her garden. She talked about my grandfather, who had been gone for 11 years. She talked about me. "You're the one who got out," she told me once, and when I started to protest, she held up her hand. "I mean that as a compliment, baby. Don't argue with me." Then the visit started getting harder to schedule. Aunt Patricia began responding to my texts slowly. Then not at all. When I called the house, my grandmother would answer and seem happy to hear from me. But within a few minutes she'd say, "Patricia needs me," and get off the phone. I drove down unannounced twice and found my grandmother alone, perfectly fine, watching Wheel of Fortune, confused about why I seemed anxious. The third time I drove down unannounced, Aunt Patricia was there and she was cool to me in a way that was hard to explain. Polite on the surface, something brittle underneath. A few weeks later, my mother called to tell me that my grandmother had told Aunt Patricia she preferred not to have so many unannounced visitors, that she found it stressful, that she'd asked for some space. I remember sitting with that sentence for a long time. My grandmother, who called me every Thursday, who told me I was the one who got out, who had never once in my life suggested that seeing me was anything other than a pleasure. I called the house to ask her directly. She answered, and she sounded different, flatter, more careful. She said she did love me very much, but that she was tired more now, and that planning visits was better. I said of course, and when can I plan one? She said she'd have Patricia reach out. Patricia never reached out. Patricia never reached out. I sent cards. I sent a birthday basket in October with her favorite coffee and the pecans. I received a thank you note in handwriting that looked like my grandmother's, but felt formal in a way she never was. I sent letters. I stopped getting responses. I told myself she was declining. I told myself this was what happened when people aged and their world got smaller. I told myself I was respecting her wishes. I was doing the thing I now understand is the most dangerous thing you can do when someone you love is being kept from you. I was being reasonable. I was being polite. I was waiting. My grandmother died 14 months ago. I found out by text. My mother sent a group message to me and my 2 cousins at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. Mom passed peacefully this morning. Service details to come. I sat on my bathroom floor for an hour. Then I got up, called my supervisor, and drove to Clemson. The service was small, immediate family only. My grandmother's house smelled different. Some of her things had already been moved. I noticed the quilts she always kept folded over the back of her reading chair was not in its place. I noticed her journals were not on the shelf where she kept them. At the service, Aunt Patricia stood at the center of things with an air of authority that didn't sit right with me, but I was grieving. We all were. I held my mother's hand and I let it go. 2 months later, I received a letter from an attorney. My grandmother had updated her will 18 months before she died. The new will left her home, her savings account, and the entirety of her estate, which I later learned was valued at approximately $280,000, to Aunt Patricia, sole beneficiary. The previous will, which I had seen a copy of years earlier when my grandmother showed it to me herself, had divided everything equally among her 3 children, with small separate bequests to me and my 2 cousins. My mother and her brother, my Uncle Gary, each received nothing. I want to stop here and say something clearly. My grandmother had every legal right to change her will. I am not saying she didn't. What I am saying is that the woman who changed that will 18 months before she died, isolated, dependent on a single caregiver, unable to receive unannounced visitors, responding to letters and handwriting that didn't sound like her, was not making a free and informed choice in the way I understood her to be capable of. I am saying that I had a sick, quiet feeling that something had happened to her in those last 2 years, and I had told myself to be patient and reasonable. And I had waited, and now there was nothing left to go back to. My Uncle Gary hired an estate attorney. I started making calls. Here's what we found. The attorney who drafted the updated will was not my grandmother's longtime attorney. It was a man she had never worked with before, referred by according to his own intake notes, a close family friend. The close family friend was Aunt Patricia's husband. The 2 witnesses on the will were employees of a business owned by Aunt Patricia's husband, my grandmother's longtime attorney, a woman named Mrs. Blevins, who had known my grandmother for 20 years. Told me that she had received a call from my grandmother approximately 2 years before she died, asking to schedule an appointment to discuss the will. Before that appointment could be made, she received a second call from a woman who identified herself as my grandmother's caregiver, canceling the appointment and saying my grandmother's health had made travel difficult. Mrs. Blevins sent 2 follow-up letters. Neither was returned. I found those letters in a box in my grandmother's storage room, unopened. I also found 3 of my own letters, the ones I'd sent after the visits stopped, unopened. I sat on the floor of that storage room for a very long time. I did not feel rage right away. I felt something colder. I felt the specific grief of understanding that she had been waiting too. That she had been trying to reach people, and the mail had been intercepted and the appointments had been cancelled. And she had died believing that the people who loved her had simply drifted away. My letters to her. In a box she had never opened. That was the moment I understood what had actually happened in that house. I took photographs of everything. I contacted a forensic document examiner. The signatures on the updated will showed inconsistencies, with authenticated examples of my grandmother's signature from earlier documents. Consistent with, and I am quoting the examiner's report here, an individual experiencing significant fine motor decline or external signature guidance. I sent the full report to the estate attorney. I sent a copy to Uncle Gary. I made an additional copy and put it in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment. Then I waited for Christmas. My cousin Becca hosts Christmas dinner every year at her house in Greenville. Becca is Aunt Patricia's daughter. She is also someone I have always liked, genuinely, and who I believed was not aware of what her mother had done. The dinner draws about 25 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, their spouses, a few family friends who've been coming so long they've become fixtures. It is loud and warm, and my grandmother used to sit at the head of the long table and complain every year that there wasn't enough seating. Aunt Patricia always sat to her right. I drove to Greenville with my folder on the passenger seat and my grandmother's quilt in my back seat, because I had taken it from the storage room the day I found the letters. I want to be honest, I had not decided yet, in that car, exactly what I was going to do. I had a plan. I had documents, but I had also loved these people my whole life, and knowing that something terrible happened and walking into the middle of Christmas dinner and saying so are two very different things. What made the decision for me was Aunt Patricia. I arrived 20 minutes after most people. I found my mother in the kitchen, quieter than usual. I hugged Becca at the door. I set a dish down on the counter. And then I walked into the dining room and found Aunt Patricia standing at the head of the table. My grandmother's chair. She had put a placemat down and set her wine glass there, and she was standing there talking to my uncle's wife with the easy confidence of someone who has decided that what belonged to someone else now belongs to her. I stood very still for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen, took a glass of water, and sat down. Dinner proceeded normally for about 40 minutes. Then, during the lull after the main course, Aunt Patricia said something. She said it to the table at large, in the pleasant tone of someone making a casual observation, but every word was aimed at me. She said that it was such a shame that some family members had chosen to pursue legal challenges against my grandmother's final wishes, that it was hurtful, that my grandmother had been very clear about what she wanted, and that dragging it through lawyers and paperwork was a way of saying her decisions didn't matter. The table got quiet. My mother stared at her plate. I watched Aunt Patricia finish her thought, watched her take a sip of wine, watched several heads turn toward me with that particular expression that says, "We're not taking sides, but we want to see what you do." I reached down beside my chair where I had placed my bag, and I took out the folder. I want to tell you that I was calm. I was. My hands were steady. I had not planned a speech, and I didn't give one. I simply said that I understood why she'd brought this up, that I was glad to talk about it, and that I had some things I thought everyone at the table should see. I took out the first document, and I passed it to my Uncle Gary on my left. The forensic examiner's report. I told the table what it contained. I used plain language. I did not editorialize. Then, I passed the photographs of the unopened letters. Mine. Mrs. Blevins. My mother's, which I had found in the box and which my mother had not known about. She made a sound when she recognized her own handwriting that I will not forget. I passed the intake notes from the new attorney with the referral source. I passed the copies of Mrs. Blevins' follow-up correspondence. 43 pages, passed around a Christmas dinner table in Greenville, South Carolina. Aunt Patricia said I was fabricating things. She said it with force at first, and then with slightly less force, and then with a quality of voice that told me she had understood, perhaps, that fabrication would be difficult to argue against. 43 pages of documentation. Her husband said nothing. He studied the placemat. Becca, my cousin. My genuinely kind cousin who I had been afraid to hurt, read 3 pages in silence, and then put them down and looked at her mother with an expression I recognized because I'd worn it myself. The expression of someone rearranging everything they thought they knew. She said very quietly, "Mom, is this true?" It was not a question. My Uncle Gary said he had already spoken with an attorney and that formal proceedings would be filed in January. My mother, who had not spoken since finding her unopened letters, reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Aunt Patricia left before dessert. Her husband followed. The dinner continued. It wasn't triumphant. I want to say that plainly because I think these moments are rarely triumphant in the way we imagine them when we're building toward them. It was sad and complicated and several people cried, and Becca and I sat together on her back porch, afterward in the cold, and she kept saying she was sorry. She was so sorry. And I kept telling her this wasn't hers to be sorry for. What I kept coming back to was not the money. It was the 3 letters in that box. My grandmother, in her house, with her mail being managed by someone else, dying without knowing I had written. Dying without knowing that Mrs. Blevins had written. Dying in a smaller and smaller world that someone else had constructed around her while I was 2 hours away being reasonable and respectful and patient. I was wrong to wait so long. I say that without softening it. I should have been louder earlier. I should have shown up more. I should have made enough noise that there was no way to screen me out quietly. I don't know if it would have changed the outcome, but I know that I will spend a long time living with the version where I was patient and she was alone. The estate is still in litigation. That part is slow and undramatic, and involves a lot of emails from attorneys. Uncle Gary and I check in every few weeks. My mother is doing what she can. What I know is this: the will can be contested. The money might or might not be recovered, but what happened in that house in those last 2 years, the mail, the canceled appointments, the slow closing of the circle around her, that is documented now. It has been seen by people who can do something about it. It is no longer something that happened quietly and got buried. My grandmother kept a journal every day for 40 years. When we went through her things, we found the journal stopped 18 months before she died. The last entry was short. She wrote about the garden and a phone call from a friend, and the way the light looked through the kitchen window that morning. She wrote, at the end of that entry, "I feel like I've been waiting for something, but I can't remember what." I carried that sentence home. I carry it now. Some days it is very heavy. I have her quilts on my couch. It still smells like lavender. I don't wash it because I'm not ready to lose that yet. Some evenings I sit with it and the weight of it in my lap feels like something, and I let myself sit there with it for a while before I get up and go on. If you have someone you love and things have gotten quiet and you've been telling yourself that quiet is what they want, please, don't do what I did. Please, don't wait. Please, be inconveniently, stubbornly, loudly present until you have heard it from them directly, in their own voice, with their own words. Reasonable and patient is sometimes just another way of saying, absent. She deserved better. So do yours. People often ask what it feels like to finally tell the truth in a room full of people who were comfortable with the lie. I can tell you what it felt like for me. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting down something I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be mine to carry at all. What happened to my grandmother? The intercepted mail, the cancelled appointments, the slow and deliberate closing of the world around her, didn't happen because one person was evil and everyone else was helpless. It happened because a series of small, reasonable choices added up to something no one chose to examine too closely. My mother didn't push hard enough when the visits got difficult to schedule. My uncle didn't ask the right questions when the will was read. I told myself that patience was the same thing as respect. None of us were monsters. All of us were wrong. That is the harder thing to sit with. Not the person who caused the harm, but the accumulated weight of everyone who looked away at exactly the wrong moment, including me. I think about Clara. about the version of myself that drove to Clemson twice unannounced and then stopped because it felt intrusive. And I want to tell her that love is not supposed to be polite at the expense of being present. That the most important thing you can do for someone who is being quietly isolated is to be inconveniently, stubbornly, repeatedly there. Not aggressive, not accusatory. Just there, consistently, in a way that cannot be quietly managed around. The folder I brought to that Christmas dinner was not built overnight. It was built through months of phone calls and document requests and a forensic examiner who spent 3 weeks comparing signatures. It was built because I stopped being reasonable about my timeline and started being serious about the truth. Intelligence without courage is just information sitting in a drawer. It took me too long to understand that knowing something and doing something about it are two entirely separate acts, and only one of them actually matters. What I want you to take from Clara's story is not the drama of the dinner table. It is the quieter truth that runs underneath it. The people who harm others rarely do it loudly. They do it through patience, through small adjustments, through the careful management of access and information. The way you protect the people you love against that kind of harm is not by being suspicious of everyone. It is by staying close enough that there is no gap for that kind of management to operate in. My grandmother wrote in her last journal entry that she felt like she had been waiting for something but couldn't remember what. I believe she was waiting for one of us to show up and refuse to leave. I believe she went to her end still waiting. I cannot fix that. But I can carry it honestly, and I can tell her story in a way that maybe keeps someone else from making the same quiet, reasonable, patient mistake that I made. That is the only thing I have left to give her. I intend to give it as clearly as I can.